So, Rabbi Daniel Lapin, it's such a pleasure to have you at the Arise Summit. And I've since we've invited you to this, I started listening to your weekly podcast, which I've gotten a lot out of. It's fantastic. And first of all, I want to say to everyone who's watching this Arise Summit to go to Rabbi Daniel Lapin's podcast. It's fantastic. And Rabbi Lapin, I think I could start to refer to you as my rabbi now that I'm being edified by you spiritually on a week-to-week basis.
Well, thank you very much indeed. It's kind of you to say so. I very much enjoy doing that weekly podcast, and I try to deliver value.
Yeah, no, it's fantastic. And at this summit this year, we also have John Medved, who's talking a little bit about, some Jewish principles and wisdom for doing business. And he also said that you're his rabbi as well. So I feel like I'm in good company. I listened to two ongoing people through podcasts. One is Jordan Peterson, and one is you. And, I find Jordan Peterson tackles issues at a very deep philosophical level. And then you come and give a very practical perspective and make them easy to implement. I feel like a lot of what you're talking about is similar. And it's been a huge encouragement in my life.
Yeah, no, Jordan is terrific. And I'm a big fan of his book, his 12 Principles. And yes, I mean, he is an academic, which I'm not, and so it's two different perspectives. But I hope both useful.
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking of books, I got a hold of your "Thou Shalt Prosper," 10 Commandments for Success in Business. I hope I'm getting the title right. I got a hold of it probably around 10 years ago and just loved it. I read it a few times and actually had the honor of and privilege of teaching it with your permission, if you remember. Yeah, and so many people got a lot out of that. So maybe that's just a good starting place. Why would you as an Orthodox rabbi choose to write a book which helps people do a better job at managing money and doing business?
There were two main reasons. The first is that I found myself from about 91, 92, somewhere around about that point, I found myself being invited to address many Christian audiences. And that was the result of an earlier book I had written called America's Real War, in which I laid down the hypothesis that America is unquestionably a divided nation. However, I insisted then that it was not divided between rich and poor, or between black and white, or between men and women, but that it was divided between those who saw Bible-based Judeo-Christian values as vital for the nation's survival, and on the other hand, those who believed that Bible-based Judeo-Christian values were primitive obstructions to what they saw as progress. And there were blacks and whites on both sides, and men and women on both sides, and rich and poor on both sides. And I argued that that was the fundamental canyon that cuts through American culture. And I think events have proven that to be correct. Nobody on the left in America could believe that in 2016, Donald Trump obtained so many positive votes from African-American people. But that just emphasizes my point. Anyway, that book became very popular indeed, and it remains very popular. But what it did, it put me in front of large Christian audiences, which for an Orthodox Jewish rabbi was an extremely bizarre experience, I can tell you. The very first time was at the Hilton Towers ballroom in Washington, D.C. I remember it as if it was yesterday. And it was 6,000 members of an organization called the Christian Coalition. And needless to say, I had prepared very carefully my speech. And when I was introduced and went up to the podium, the applause took about 15 or 20 seconds to die down. And when you're standing at the podium, 20 seconds is a long time. And I just had this moment of divine intuition where I really felt I was being told to be smart here. And I said, ladies and gentlemen, I have tossed away little notes of everything I was intending to say today. And I want to start off a completely unprepared speech by telling you what my grandfather would say if he knew that his grandson was in a room with 6,000 Christians.
Right.
And I waited for 5 seconds, which also felt like a long time. And the room was absolutely quiet. And I cupped my hands to the microphone and I said, "Run for your life." And I said, well, times have changed. And it's very, very different. It's now that I share many more values in common, not theological, but practical life values in common with you, much more than I would in common with many people who are part of the American Jewish community, which is an astonishing thing to have said back in '92. But at any rate, that was the reality. So in answer to your question, as people around the country and later the world got to know me, they felt more comfortable asking me questions that bothered them, but which they felt were politically incorrect. They may be questions that betray an inherent bigotry. The most important of these is very simple, and that is, why are Jews disproportionately good with money? That's the question they wanted to ask.
And it's not just in Israel, it's everywhere in the world.
In the 1800s already, it was very noticeable in that Mark Twain, the great American novelist and journalist, wrote this observation. In the early 1900s, Winston Churchill did. And then there are writers in Livorno, Italy, which had a big Jewish population in the early days, in the 1600s, the 1700s. And again, it was noted then too that it's not to say there were no poor Jews. However, a much higher proportion of Jews were living comfortable, affluent lives than could be said of the general population.
That's very interesting. Before we move on to this book, just in response to your first point, I've often said within the Israeli context, as an Israeli citizen, that our best leaders and prime ministers are people who viewed our nation as within a biblical narrative or a biblical story, let's say as a fulfillment of biblical prophecy, right? Whether it's, David Ben-Gurion, who actually called the modern state of Israel the third kingdom, because this is the second time we've come back from dispersion, or Bibi Netanyahu, who stood before the United Nations and will quote the prophet Isaiah, etc. I think that they've been the best people for managing the affairs of our nation, and then so you have the same divide in Israel, that you have in the United States. But coming to your second book, I'm a business person and I want to receive advice about managing my affairs in a better way. You are a Jewish rabbi. You're not Bill Gates. You're not Warren Buffett. Why should I ask you? Is it because I should be interested because I see the success in Jewish business people around me, and I want to know what are the secrets behind what they're doing?
Well, yes, and what you say is absolutely correct. I'm maybe not be as interesting as Bill Gates or Warren Buffett. I'm certainly not as smart as they are.
I don't listen to their podcasts. I listen to your podcast.
High IQ individuals, but I am probably more useful because I don't think Bill Gates, again, with all due credit to Bill Gates, a lot of stars just lined up right. His mother was a board of directors member of IBM, which was then the dominant computer company in the world. Right. And his dad was an international and prominent lawyer. And he came of age on the cusp of the computer revolution. Most people who drop out of university do not become billionaires. Bill Gates did, and it was for a lot of reasons that don't apply to you and me. And so in that sense, for ordinary people, using the principles of 3,000 years of Jewish tradition is more reliable because they've been white Jews and black Jews, and they've been brilliant, smart Jews, and they've been average intelligence Jews, and there's been men and women Jews, and everybody, all of them, have benefited from this accumulation of ancient Jewish wisdom, which has so much to say about money.
Which I think is important because there's still, in many societies, even traveling out east, people seem to believe that there's some kind of Jewish conspiracy, that we behind the scenes are pulling the strings and helping each other because we control the banks and the finance. And there are all these stories floating around. If they only knew how much we actually don't help each other.
No, it's tragic. I wish all those stories were true. But anybody who has experienced synagogue politics knows the truth.
Right, exactly. So it's not because of that. And you mentioned IQ. I assume that we would probably be, Jewish people are probably average, the international median. Would that be correct regarding IQ?
I think of Sam Walton, who created Walmart, one of the largest companies in the world. Sam Walton was just like most of us, in the middle of that bell curve of intelligence distribution. Where are the people who are at the top end of that distribution, that tiny, tiny percentage of people with super high IQs? Well, with the rare exceptions of Bill Gates and Warren Buffett, virtually all the rest of them are on the faculties of universities. Anybody who's ever worked in the financial services industry knows that almost no demographic in America is worse with money than intellectuals and academics on university faculties. So the idea that IQ produces wealth, it's simply not true. If anything, it's the old adage you heard from your mother. She said, "Stop being too smart for your own good."
Right.
And it's absolutely right. We prosper by engaging in transactions. There is no other way to do it. Now, there are transactions that take place at the point of a gun, and that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about transactions where both parties are consensual.
Yeah.
In transactions, we all tend to select, for those with whom we would like to conduct transactions, people whom we know, whom we like, and whom we trust. And the truth is, most of us don't trust people we intuitively sense are much, much, much smarter than we are, because we feel that they have a hidden, a sort of undisclosed agenda that we're not privy to. We like doing business with people we relate to comfortably.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Okay, so our working presumption is that the disproportionate success of Jewish business people around the world isn't because of some Jewish mafia. It's not because of extremely high IQs. It's because of implementing millennia of Jewish wisdom based on the Torah in our everyday lives. What would you say are some of the biggest principles or paradigm shifts say Christian, most of our viewers are Christian business people who want to grasp kind of the big, let's say, philosophical foundations of Jewish business. If you could point some of those out, that would be helpful.
It's difficult to say the most important one. It's a lot like, anybody who has been happily married for a few years, whenever they're asked, tell us the most important secret of your happy, there isn't one. I'd say the most important secret is that there is no one important secret.
Right.
It's a lot of things. So the same is true here. And that's why my book is, Thou Shalt Prosper, the 10 commandments for making money. But nonetheless, I can certainly answer your question in terms of a good starting place.
Right.
And a good starting place is to recognize the extent to which we are holistic. I think people today are beginning to understand the relationship between the soul and the body. between the mind and the body, the understanding that a great deal of our physical health resides inside our hearts and in our minds. There is a holistic aspect to it, and I think the same is true in understanding just how money works, and understanding that our ability to do something is very much linked to our conviction in it being possible to do. And so some of the best football coaches or all sports coaches are not necessarily people who were best at playing that. They're the ones who are best at communicating to the team a strategy for success and a conviction in the inevitability of triumph. Those are the ones that do best.
So when you're talking about the changing your state of mind, you're saying that we can actually, our concept of business and success in business, of being number one good and number one attainable, it would be a fundamental shift of thinking for many audiences?
Most of us need to have an internal feeling of decency and virtue. One of the reasons that recycling became so popular so quickly in the United States, do you know what I'm talking about when I say recycling?
Yes.
One of the reasons it became so popular is because it provided a non-religious path to virtue. Anybody marketing electric vehicles in the United States, anybody working in a Tesla dealership will tell you that virtue is what they're selling.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so this is a really important part of it. And so if people believe that making money is grubby and that making money is greedy, or at least an expression, a manifestation of greed, or that making money is exploiting other people, in other words, that nobody makes money, they take money, if you believe that, you are fatally handicapped in the business arena, because even if you force yourself to succeed, you're nonetheless going to feel you're doing something morally reprehensible. And no decent person ever succeeds to his full potential doing something that deep in his heart he believes to be morally reprehensible. And so a great deal of attention is paid in my teaching programs. An enormous amount of attention is paid towards understanding, if you like, what God's original intentions were for human economic interaction.
So why would making money be a virtuous thing? Why is it a good thing? Why is it something I should feel comfortable with?
That, of course, is the key question, and it isn't. It's not an easy or short answer. But let me. I mean, it means literally readjusting one's entire perspective. And the reason I say this is because I would say, and look, until COVID, I was speaking at about 30 churches a year in the United States. Typically, I would speak to about 15 Jewish audiences. I'm thinking at large size audiences, about 15 Jewish audiences a year and about 30 Christian audiences a year. So I got to know and do know, I count among my dearest friends, many of the prominent Christian leaders in this country, of whom I think very highly. And so I will tell you very candidly that a very common problem, a very common virus, and I use that term because it is every bit as dangerous as other kinds of viruses, is the virus that teaches people to absorb into their hearts an equation that reads in mathematical terms, poverty equals virtue.
Right.
And unfortunately, this is found in many deeply committed Jewish communities as well, who also believe that their poverty is somehow a sign of their virtue. and who believe that that by turning their backs on money and spurning the world of finance and economic success, they are thereby showing their fealty to God Almighty. This is very, very common in America's Christian community, and unfortunately common also in my own community. And that was the other reason I felt very impelled to teach on this. And it's not easy because you're asking people you're asking people to acknowledge that years of poverty and deprivation have been for naught.
Right.
But with that as the intro, let me answer your question. The first point is that one has to recognize the existence of a physical and of a spiritual world. Now, when I say spiritual, I'm not speaking about God. I'm not speaking about morality. I'm not speaking about sin. Spiritual is a quantitative descriptor. And here's what it is. It's very, very straightforward, but it requires a mental adjustment. Physical is anything that can be measured in a laboratory. Spiritual is anything for which no machine or mechanism exists for its measurement. Here are some examples of physical and spiritual. My height is a physical measurement. The color of my skin is a physical measurement. How much hair I have on my head, which isn't much, is a physical measurement. My integrity, if there was a way of measuring that and you found that way, you'd make $1 million in the first 6 months, because there's not a single company or recruiting organization that wouldn't buy your product.
Right.
There is no way to measure integrity. There is no way of measuring loyalty. There's no way of measuring persistence. There's no way of measuring willpower and discipline. These are all spiritual qualities. Yes. Love is a spiritual quality. Joy is a spiritual quality. Now, people in marketing very often understand how important the spiritual side is. I know a woman intimately, whose name I will not disclose for anything, who will drive across town in order to buy gasoline at a place that her phone app reveals that gasoline is 15 cents a gallon cheaper.
Right.
That is, and I can explain all the physical phenomenon. I can explain to her that it's her time, and there's you using up gas going there, and it's wear and tear. It doesn't matter. She's from Brooklyn, New York, and the sheer pleasure of buying gasoline less expensively is worth it to her.
Right.
Somebody buys an item of clothing with a certain brand label on it. There's no utilitarian value in that. It's not an economic deal. It's a spiritual deal. And so we have to understand in economics and business the importance of the spiritual. In fact, an argument could be made that it's even more important in much of contemporary marketing. Apple's appeal is entirely spiritual, because utilitarian value of an iPhone can largely be obtained for considerably less money.
So most of our crowd, when we're looking at spiritual principles, would turn to the Bible as a source of wisdom regarding spiritual principles. What does the Bible have to say about money being good or evil?
Well, what it says is that only human beings are capable of choosing between good and evil.
Yeah.
No animate object is intrinsically good or evil. No animal is intrinsically good or evil. If Tom kills Jerry, then we regard Tom's action as so evil that we cannot allow Tom to walk around society. We may well execute him. because his action was evil. But if I'm a farmer and a wolf comes out of the forest one night and eats one of my sheep, I don't now hold a symposium on the declining morality of local wolves. The wolves do what wolves do. It's my job to better protect my livestock. But furthermore, what it says is that we have to ascertain whether money is physical or spiritual. And the reason is because it's a very fundamental law of physics that any physical object can only occupy one place at any given time. And so if I am right now in the state of Florida, I am not in Jerusalem. And that's all there is to it. And similarly, if I have a piece of cake in front of me, and when I turn my head, my cake is no longer on my plate in front of me, but my son has it on his plate next to him, the conclusion is pretty simple, and that is he took my cake.
Right.
And that is a reality for all physical objects. And therefore, if money is physical and I do not have very much, but the person next to me has a great deal, then he took it from me. And that makes it immoral. And therefore, the only moral thing for me as a moral person to do, I like to think of myself as a decent moral person, I must practice socialism and practice the redistribution of money for an equitable result for everybody, because it's something physical. That is exactly what I would do if I was a zookeeper. And I found that when I distributed all the food for the feed for the elephants, I come back and the biggest elephant has taken all the food, put it in front of him, and all the other elephants are sitting with no food, looking sadly at the big pile of food in front of the big elephant. I would redistribute the food. That's what I would do. Because if people are materialistic and animals, then redistribution under the terms of communism make perfect sense. I would lead the charge. You only have to convince me there's no God and that we human beings are here as a result of a completely materialistic, unaided, lengthy process of evolution, then I would have to become a socialist, because that means that money cannot be spiritual, it has to be physical, and therefore it has to be redistributed. But if money is more like a tune, see, if I sing a tune and a whole lot of people around me walk home with my tune, I'm not any less well off than I was before when they took my cake.
Right.
But spiritual things can be shared to the benefit of everybody. So you go away with my song and you are making my world a better place. And so it is that if you and I engage in a transaction and you buy goods from me, you pay $100 for those goods because they are worth to you more than $100. Otherwise, you would never have engaged in the action. And I sell it because I value $100 as more than the goods. Otherwise, I would never have parted with them. That is the secret of eBay.
Right.
And it's why you will never find animals, you'll never find dogs trading on the net present value of a bone. Hey, dog, how about you give that bone to this dog and he'll give you back 3 bones next Wednesday. Dogs don't operate like that, because there is no such thing as the spiritual value of any asset. Only human beings have that. And so once we see that, in other words, for people who only view a materialistic world, and in the United States, there are more and more people like that, which is precisely why more and more young people are being drawn to the socio-economic moral structure of socialism, because if we are nothing but materialistic creatures, that makes perfect sense. Anyway, so that is the basic concept, is that money is a spiritual commodity. Now, why is it moral, you ask? And for that, we have to go back to the 50th verse of Scripture, which says, not good for man to be alone.
Right.
Now, a lot of people assume that that is talking about specifically about the matrimonial prospects of Adam. But of course it isn't. It is a general statement for all people and for all time. God wants us to connect with one another. And he gives us two mechanisms right early in the story. There are two mechanisms. The two mechanisms are marriage and money. And both of them are pleasurable. Making a profit and connecting with a woman are both pleasurable activities. And that is the goal. God does not want us to be isolated and disconnected. He penalizes those who are. The prime characteristic of the so-called homeless in America, the thing they share is very clear, something that is well known, and that is they share a disconnect from friends and family.
So what you're saying is, so you're saying money is a spiritual thing, and it connects people and creates value for each other, if I'm following you correctly. So we're not in a zero-sum game, that if one person has money, then they're taking away from somebody else. You're saying money is connecting us as human beings. Transaction and business are connecting us, which means we're not alone, and also creating value for each other, if I'm following you correctly.
Well, yes, and that's really important, because the problem is that as a society becomes more and more materialistic, it becomes harder to conceive of the notion that money is a spiritual commodity. And so, you can think about it like, is money the discs of metal clinking in my pocket, or is it strips of colored paper in my wallet? Or perhaps it's the orientation of iron oxide molecules on the magnetic strip on the back of my credit card. Or maybe it's ones and zeros on the hard drive at my bank. Or maybe it's when I write you a check for $10. Maybe that's money. Or maybe we shake hands and I say, how about if I give you $10 on Friday? Well, that's money.
Right.
So, yeah, it's a spiritual representation of serving another one of God's children. That's what it is. So forget about Econ 101. Oh, it's a medium of exchange, blah, 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 blah. Yeah, it's right. I mean, yeah, that's all very primitive. The reality of it is that it's evidence of you having served another human being. That's what money is. And in exactly the same way that any father is made happy by his children serving one another.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
It's a great moment in the life of any parent when your children stop squabbling and start cooperating.
Right.
Our Father in heaven is no different. When he sees us serving one another, it brings him joy. And so he is good enough to give us an incentive to serve one another. One of them is the sensual pleasure of creating a family, and the other is the pleasure of making money. Now, so strong is this spiritual imperative that people who get money in other ways very often find their lives diminished, not enhanced. For instance, in the United States, it's well known, people who win the lottery overwhelmingly have their lives diminished. Very often trust fund babies.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Are not fulfilled or creative or productive people.
Yeah.
But people who make their own money find joy in making money. And so they should, because it is evidence that they've served another human being. Now, you see that in the absence of all this, my making money is something I'm embarrassed about because I'm taking it from other people.
Now, you mentioned fathers wanting to see their children go out and succeed in life. And so if I have a child I have several daughters that are in their early 20s that are thinking about what career path to take and how will I find fulfillment in life, what would you say as a rabbi would be some basic advice that we can give to help people find the right profession, the right place to...
Am I speaking to your daughters?
You're speaking to my daughters.
How old are they?
Well, I have 26, 23, 20, and 12. So, yeah.
Okay. How many of them are married?
One of them is married.
So to her, I would say, talk to your husband and sit down and decide whether the two of you should engage in some entrepreneurial exercise together or work. You're already in good shape, but don't neglect raising a family, because ultimately, at the end of the day, that will give you more fulfillment than running a company.
Right.
And to your three other daughters, including the 12-year-old, I would say, do not make the mistake of thinking that ultimate fulfillment will come from anything other than becoming a wife and a mother.
And I do have one son. We've been speaking about my daughters, but I have a son who's also going to be 26 this year. He's trying to decide what to study, what profession
How old
to go
is he?
into. He's 26.
What has he been doing since he's been 13?
He's an Israeli, so of course he's served in the army.
Excellent, good.
He actually did public service instead of the army, where he was working in a home. He was working in a home for abandoned children, and now he's gone back to improve some of his grades. And while he's doing that, he's working as a waiter in a restaurant. And he's
wonderful.
And he's considering
wonderful. That is a far more valuable education than an MBA.
That's great. But he's,
and what does he want to study? What does he want to go back to school to study for?
He's considering studying architecture, but he's not exactly sure. And he's thinking right now, do I want to study architecture, or do I want to go into social services and continue the work with abandoned children and so on and so forth. So he's right at that point where he's trying to decide what to do.
Yeah. So explain to him that he will be able to do far more for children or any of the people who need help and for whom he rightly feels compassion once he has made a great deal of money. He will be far more useful. And number two, it will also give him a deep sense of fulfillment, far more ultimately than just being a social worker. And number three, is he married yet?
He's not married yet, no.
He is, let me put it very bluntly, and I'm saying this because we have limited time, I understand. And I would say it differently if I was sitting down with him over a cup of coffee at a cafe in Jerusalem, which I very much hope to be doing soon. But to just put it bluntly and briefly here and now, I would say to him that the quality of woman you could marry will be much higher as a successful businessman than as a social worker. In other words, I never speak disparagingly about women who are aware and conscious of the finances of the guy they're dating. What I call a woman who is dating a man and she knows nothing whatsoever about his financial life, a silly goose. And that is because a man's financial life, we're not talking about whether he's good at tennis. There are plenty men who are good at tennis and who are horrible human beings. Right. Not many successful business people who are horrible human beings. Yes, there are exceptions, obviously, but certainly in the record keeping of the Western world, there are many more doctors who sexually abuse their patients than there are business professionals. In other words, a far higher proportion of business professionals are moral, upright people than is true for doctors or teachers.
So let's say my son says, okay, I want to make money. I want to acquire money so I can marry a better person and so I can, live a fulfilled life. Where do I start? What's the best place to find my niche in making a good living?
This is not just because Mrs. Lapin didn't raise a foolish son, but I'm thinking about him as much as I am about me when I say he should read my book and study it very carefully. Right. Because it's a major shift. He right now, I don't even know him, but I can tell you from everything you've shared, I can tell you that in his heart, he believes that social work is a more moral course of action than making money. And so I would need to work with him on that and to help him readjust his breadth of thinking to be able to wrap himself around the fact that in a consensual, transparent market, the only way you make money is by improving the lives of other human beings.
Right. So are you saying, I know it's very difficult to make a comparison like this, but if you take a very wealthy person like Bill Gates, you mentioned Bill Gates, and you compare him to, let's say, Mother Teresa, who's out there.
Or let's take the most sagely rabbi living in Bnei Brak or in Asharim. And you have to hear me carefully on this, because whenever I say this, people go crazy. And I said it, there's a podcast called Kosher Money on YouTube. It's a Jewish thing. And I did an interview with them about a month or so ago. And it's gone viral. It's like 300,000 views or something. And a lot of hundreds and hundreds of comments. A lot of them are angry because on that I said that who has served more human beings? Who's been of more benefit to more people, Mother Teresa or Bill Gates? And I would say the same thing in the context of a venerable Hasidic rabbi, or if you like, Bill Gates, or a major Israeli entrepreneur. How many how many lives has that rabbi improved?
Right.
And the answer is very finite. You want to say, oh, thousands. I'll grant you thousands of lives. Tens of thousands? Yeah, I'll grant you tens of thousands. Influential rabbi, ripple effect, many years of teaching people who taught other people. As many, 100,000 lives he's changed? Yeah, I'll grant you that. How about 500,000? Will you grant me? Yeah, I'll grant you 500,000. But even you have to see you're beginning to push the envelope now.
Right.
How many lives has Bill Gates changed? And the answer is billions, because that's the number of people who've bought Microsoft software. Now, nobody forced me to buy Microsoft software. I could have bought Apple. I could have used Linux. I could have done lots of other things. But I chose Microsoft because the benefits it brought to my life exceeded the cost of the software. It's as simple as that. Another way of saying that is Bill Gates improved my life.
I agree with you that people need to read your book. Like I said, I read your book a few times, and I will recommend it to my son. Do you have any other recommendations?
I would say that he has to analyze carefully and with searing self-knowledge whether he likes people. Because in the Torah, there's a principle called Ahavat Habriot in Hebrew. It means the love of humanity. Loving other people is an important consideration. And again, business is a wonderful way of doing that. I love my vendors. I love my suppliers. I want them all to do well. I do not want them to suffer and go out of business.
Yeah.
I feel the same about my customers.
Yeah.
I feel the same about my employees. There's a lot of people I pray for, but that's because I'm in business.
Yeah.
And so, so I would say, really, the question of how you feel about human beings, and there are things you can do to change the way you feel, and I teach some of those things in my book. But it's really important to start your day really thanking God for the opportunity to interact with other human beings during the day. Solitary confinement sounds like a reward for a busy executive, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But it isn't. It's actually a torture.
Right.
We don't do well alone. Lo tov, it's not good for human beings to be alone. That is the 50th verse of the Torah. So that's one thing I would do. I wasn't joking when I said he's doing something valuable by waiting tables.
Right.
because you learn what a boss means. You learn what money is. You learn interaction with other human beings. You learn about delivering value. You learn a great deal. And so even if he wants to study architecture, and I would say that if you set up a trust to give him a great deal of money every month so he can live in comfort in a nice apartment and drive a nice car while attending university, I would say you're making a sad parenting mistake.
Why? Why would that be a mistake?
Because if he could find a way to work while he's studying architecture,
yes,
he will emerge with a far more rounded education and much, let me put it this way. You and I am sure we've both been around the block a few times. You and I could easily identify at least 10 very poor architects who are not making any money.
Right.
I really could. But I also know one or two who are very successful.
Yeah.
Now, the distinction has nothing to do with which university they attended.
Right.
And nothing to do with where they graduated in their class. It is entirely how well they've understood the principles of business.
And connecting to people.
Yes, and serving people, understanding how business works and how money works. And that's why some doctors are much more successful than others. It's not because they know more medicine. It's not that. It's because they've managed to make people not only be cured, but to feel grateful to them for curing them and for them to tell their names to many other people. In other words, it's customer service. Now, I also know doctors who are on the edge of destitution, and they're the ones who say, no, I'm not going to worry. I'm not in the customer service. I don't care about a bedside manner. I cure my patients, and that's all I have to do. And they go hungry.
This is a very refreshing perspective. In the Christian world, Rabbi Lapin, I find that many times people talk about kingdom business or kingdom impact investing, and many times that means that business itself is not enough. I need to add something to that in order for this to be righteous. Either I have to donate a certain amount, or I have to hire a certain type of people, or pray for. And what you're saying is business itself is righteous because you are serving other people and learning to love other people through your business. You don't need to add anything to it.
You put your finger on that very, very eloquently. You're 100% right. I sometimes start speeches by saying, raise your hands if you want more money. And people try and slide down in their seats. A few people have a sense where I may be going. They put up their hands, but people are very embarrassed to say that.
Right.
I say, look, I really prefer speaking to honest audiences than lying audiences. Stop lying to me. You would not have come to the speech look at the topic. The topic is how to increase your revenue this year. That's the topic. Why did you come here if you didn't want more? Of course you want more money.
Right.
Now I'm going to ask you, why do you want more money? And overwhelmingly the answer is so I can give to the church, or I can give to the synagogue, or give to charity, and that's the expected answer. That's what they think is the only way to make up for the evil aspect of wanting to make money. This is exactly like the 17th century and 16th century pirates of the Caribbean.
Okay.
Of whom, by the way, there were many Jews. I don't know if you know that.
I'm not aware of that, no.
From which I take great pleasure, because I say to myself that if this rabbi thing doesn't work out, I do have an alternative career path. But what pirates used to do is, after a long and happy career of plunder, they would then settle in Kingston, Jamaica, and build a church. They would donate money for the church, and this way they would buy their way back into respectable society.
Right.
And that's what people think today now. And That's why, okay, you want to make more money? Why? Oh, so I can give charity. Giving charity is a totally different discussion.
Right.
Talk about that if you like. It's very important. It has nothing to do with this conversation.
Right, right.
In this conversation, in the process of making money, you have already helped other people.
Now, one of the principles you talk about in your book, which I just want to ask you to if we can delve into a little bit, is never consider retiring. That comes as a shock to a lot of people, a lot of business people. Many people today, everything they do is focused on saving enough money so one day I can retire and sit back with my legs up on my porch and watch the sunset or drink something on a beach somewhere. Why is that a bad idea from your perspective?
Yeah. So first of all, I'm not saying you shouldn't build up assets and acquire security.
Right.
I'm saying you shouldn't ever think of stopping to work. Okay, I mean, the first basic reason is because you'll die. Retiring is very unhealthy, and the statistics don't argue on this.
Right.
When you quit work, particularly for men, I'm one of those rare people in America who believe that male and female are totally different species.
We agree on that.
I suspected as much. And so for men, stopping to work is a terrible thing. But now let's look at it from a moral point of view. Do you play golf?
No, I do not play. Well, I have, but I wouldn't call myself a golf player.
Well, then you're ahead of me. I've never even played. But what I do know is that the golf swing is hugely important.
Right.
Golf coaches spend a lot of time teaching people where the golf club head must end up, somewhere up there.
Right, it swings through, yeah.
You got to follow through. To me, as a physicist, a person with training in physics, I think that's absurd. Because once the club has impacted the ball is now on its trajectory. And what happens to my club now is irrelevant. I can balance it on my nose. It's not going to change where the ball is going. And the coach says to me, Lapin, you're an ignoramus. What you don't understand is that if you don't plan the follow through, you won't hit the ball correctly in the first place.
Right.
Retirement is a very bad follow through idea.
Right.
And you won't hit the ball correctly if that's the follow through. Reason for that is, look at it this way. In the United States, April the 15th is tax day, So April the 14th, I customarily walk into my accountant with my shoebox full of papers and receipts. I put them on his desk and I say, over to you, this is your problem. And that's it. It's never been a problem. All right, maybe I don't wait till April the 14th, but at some point he phones me up and says, can you please make out a check to the government for so many dollars and everything is good and we're done. And then I get a bill from him for his fee and I'm as happy as could be to pay it.
Yes.
This year I walk in and his desk is clear and he's in short pants and a t-shirt and he's hitting a golf ball around the carpet of his office with a golf club. Excuse me? It's a week to tax day. What are you doing? Are you that well organized? He says, Rabbi Lapin, you must have heard I've retired. You've what? He said, I've retired. I say, how dare you? You villainous rascal, you dastardly scoundrel, how dare you? He says, why shouldn't I? I've got enough money. I don't have to work anymore.
Right.
I said, I never dreamed you were such a low-down human being. All this time, I thought you worked in order to make my life easier and all your other clients easier, and the money was a side benefit. And now I see we were just instruments to be used for your selfish purposes. You never really cared about me at all. That's what your retirement tells me.
Right.
This is about how much you can get. That's not how business works. Business works on credit. You always have to give before you can get. That's a fundamental principle of business. And we see it a lot on internet marketing, but anybody who's been marketing in the last 1,000 years knows full well, you give before you get, even on its most basic and fundamental level. You know, you put the shoes in the customer's hands and then you take the customer's credit card. That's how it works. And now you've not been interested in giving at all. And so retirement means that my whole plan all along is selfish. You cannot ultimately succeed to your full potential if deep in your heart you know you're behaving selfishly.
Wow. So
that would be another part of understanding that I would tell your son and everybody else, which is that I'm not saying work for free. We all understand you got to get your pay, you got to get your profit. I get all that. But and that's why I spoke about the need to love human beings. The underlying purpose is I like serving other human beings. I really do. I like being useful to other people. And why would I ever stop when I turn 65 for that? Why? Why would I stop doing something I love doing? I would never retire. Essentially, in Hasidic terms, if you like, what God says to the retired person is, oh, I see you've stopped serving my other children. Who needs you around any longer?
So if I'm now independently, economically independent, I don't need to make more money in order to maintain my standard of living. It's still a good idea to get up every day and to do something business oriented. That's what you're saying?
Absolutely. Make money.
Make money.
Yeah, that's the only way we know you're serving other people.
Yeah.
I'm not saying you shouldn't volunteer. Of course you should. That's part of your charitable contribution, but it isn't your main purpose.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your profound thoughts. And I want to direct our crowd again to your book, Thou Shalt Prosper, the 10 Commandments for success in business and finances.
And we also have online call, for people who are not crazy about reading, at my website at rabbidaniellapin.com, people are welcome and there are ways there that they can master this material.
Right. And you have a fantastic podcast.
Thank you. Yes, I enjoy it also. Thank you.
Yeah.
It's really important that this stuff we're talking about makes the incredibly difficult journey from here to here. It's only 12 inches from the head to the heart. One has to wrap one's being around this way of thinking. It's not just informational.
Yeah. Well, I would encourage people to purchase and to learn all of your material that you have out there. It's been a great blessing in my life. I do hope that I will be able to have that coffee with you or in Jerusalem sooner than later. It'd be great.
And with your son.
And with my son. That's a deal. Things are opening up now. So I was saying maybe Rabbi Lapin might be able to make it over here for Passover if that's something that you want to do,
Well, I would love that. The thing at the moment is I refuse to sit in a mosque for 12 hours on an airplane. I just won't do it.
Right. Well, we all hope that those days will be behind us soon.
I hope so. And that's when I will be there, God willing.
Absolutely. So I look forward to meeting you in Jerusalem with my son. And thank you so much for your valuable input today into our summit. Really appreciate speaking to you. And we look forward to being in touch.
I look forward and thank you for including me in this wonderful event.
Absolutely. Thank you. All the best. My great-grandfather, Abraham Myers, was a Jewish businessman from Darmstadt, Germany. Unfortunately, Darmstadt was the first city that was boycotted by the Third Reich when they were calling to boycott all Jewish-owned businesses in order to cripple the economy of this community. We created a rise to make sure that will never happen again. As anti-Semitic voices are rising once again around the world, and there's even this insidious campaign calling to boycott Israel, boycott Israeli companies, to isolate our economy, we want to do the opposite. We invite you to join our alliance and to help us by standing against these lies, spreading the truth about Israel, combating anti-Semitism, and creating more connectedness between the Israeli economy, and the international community, which will just create security for Israel's future. Please sign up today to become a member of the Arise Alliance. Thank you so much.